Hello there, everybody. Welcome to our exam webinar this afternoon. We are delighted to have you join us. So this is being put on between the Psychiatric Trainees Committee and the Exam Department. So my name is Chris Walsh. I'm the chair of the Psychiatric Trainees Committee. And then we have with us today a variety of people who are going to be speaking to you and answering your questions. So we have Susannah Grant, who's the head of exams at the college. We have Dr. Ian Hall, who is the chief examiner, and he's going to be talking about the new CASC syllabus. We have Dr. Vivek Agarwal, who's the CASC panel chair, with his top tips on preparing for the CASC. And we have Dr. Stephanie Ewen, who's our fantastic PTC exam rep, but also is exam rep to the ESC. And myself and Gemma, who is the PTC deputy chair, are going to be keeping things moving. So just a couple of kind of housekeeping tips. We are going to be doing this for about an hour, so we should finish at about 7 o'clock. The people are already putting questions into the Q&A, which is fantastic. They've come prepared with questions, which is what we like to see. Lots of things will probably be covered by the talks as we go along, but we've plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So if there's any questions, please fire them in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure they're all moderated and sorted for the Q&A part of the talk later. It's going to be recorded, so we can put it on the RCSec website afterwards for people to catch up with. Yes, if there's any specific questions as we go along about the running of things, just put it in the webinar chat. Otherwise, any questions about the exams and CASC, put it in the Q&A, please. So if we kick off, first of all, with Dr. Hall's presentation on the CASC syllabus. So welcome, Dr. Hall, and thank you for being with us today. And I'll let you take it from there.
Yes, thanks very much, Chris, for introducing me there. So I'm Ian Hall. I'm the chief examiner at the college. That's something I've been doing since 2019. And before that, I was actually chair of the CASC panel. So I was involved in running the CASC there. I'm also a psychiatrist for people with intellectual disability. I work in Hackney, which is in East London. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about the new CASC syllabus and the blueprint. So the blueprint is the sort of details about the way we actually set the exam, and the syllabus talks more about what we cover in the exam. But we're going to talk about both. So this arose out of our assessment strategy review, which we decided to do really because of the pandemic, and just to decide what to do in terms of assessment, both summative, which is exams, and formative, which is in the workplace. And this is partly because, as people know, we put the CASC online and turned it into an online exam during the pandemic, and we needed to decide what to do for the future of that. So as part of that, we developed a new CASC syllabus, which is developed from the new core psychiatry curriculum. And we did a big options appraisal on the CASC and a big consultation with, of course, trainees and candidates, but also educators, the regulator, the GMC, patients, and lots of other people as well. And it's no secret now that we are going to return to a face-to-face CASC from September. And another big outcome of the assessment strategy review, which they're still working on, is to look at the formative assessment of formulation skills. So maybe changing the workplace-based assessments that look at that a bit, and maybe bringing a bit more independence into that. But today, we're going to be focusing on the CASC exam. So yeah, what should we be assessing in the MRC Psych clinical exam? So we wanted to start from the beginning. And when I asked this question, yeah, people say obviously clinical skills in psychiatry, history taking, examination, management skills, communication skills are the things that always come up when we ask that question. And as I say, we wanted it to really relate to all the work that's done on the new 2022 curriculum. So hopefully people in core training in psychiatry have some familiarity with that. You'll probably know, well, you'll know if you've had a look at this anyway, that the curriculum is divided into high-level outcomes. And within those high-level outcomes, there are usually some themes, and then they're further sort of divided into key capabilities. And what we did in terms of mapping onto the CASC is we looked through all these key capabilities and see how they related to what we felt we should be assessing in the CASC. So you'll see, for example, and I've really summarized these in this diagram, but out of HLO2, that divides into communication and clinical skills, obviously highly relevant for the exam. And some of the key capabilities within communication are active listening and empathy, and working with diverse patients. So these we felt mapped onto our communication skill in the CASC, and the new thing that we've really done in this syllabus is divide up those 4 basic skills that we have in the CASC into subdivisions. So, for example, having a subdivision about empathy or about personalization and respect. And you can see we've done it as well with the clinical skills thing. We can divide that up into that's divided into different key capabilities. And again, we've mapped those onto the CASC skills and some CASC and some subdivisions of those skills as well. So that's the basic structure. And I'm just going to talk a little bit more detail about especially these skills subdivisions. So just in terms of a bit more detail about the mapping first. So here's an example of a key capability. Thoroughly assess the general health of your patients, taking into account the interplay between physical health and psychiatric needs, considering nutritional, metabolic, endocrine, and reproductive factors, and the physical impact of substance use and addiction. So it's really clear in the syllabus that this is really important. So this maps onto history, mostly we felt, and we have a subdivision about particularly about physical health history. Here's another example. So one of the key capabilities in terms of the exam is really broad. It says a full psychiatric history and a mental state examination on patients with a range of mental and neurodevelopmental disorders across the lifespan in routine and urgent emergency situations, incorporating appropriate terminology. So this maps onto lots of things with the CASC, particularly in terms of history and examination, and in terms of the mental state, we would say we want to divide the mental state up a little bit into different subdivisions that you can see there. So psychotic, non-psychotic, cognitive, and capacity and insight. Okay, just one further example of this mapping, and these are the reason I put this one in is because these are really new things I think in the curriculum that we really want to be testing in the CASC. I mean, they're developments of things that have been there before, but they're very explicitly stated now. So an inclusive approach, which considers all aspects of communication, language, sensory and cognitive needs, as well as the ethnic, social and cultural context of a patient. So we think this is really important for the practice of psychiatry and something we want to be testing. And then another one, demonstrating and understanding the inherent power imbalance between doctor and patient, particularly for those with protected characteristics, which can result in barriers to clinical effectiveness. We want to make sure we're really addressing skills in that area. So we've got this subdivision now, the communication, called personalization and respect, for which several of these new things in the curriculum map onto. Okay, so in the CASC, we're not changing the structure at all, really. We're still going to have 16 stations, and there's still going to be 5 history, 5 examination, and 6 management, and we will assess communication across all 16 stations. But here's some of the detail about those subdivisions. These are all the subdivisions that we've thought of. So you see we have 5 there for history taking. We have 6 for examination, which includes physical examination, and we include risk assessment with there, although of course in risk assessment is both examination and history to an extent. In terms of management, we've divided that up as well. So particularly we want to look at formulation, although it's limited how much you can look at formulation in a OSCE style exam, which is what we have. But making sure we have questions on biological management, but also psychological management, and also make sure we explicitly test a holistic management approach in some stations as well. Make sure we test safety planning and legal and ethical management. So this particularly around legislation, although as you probably know, we don't test the details of specific mental health legislation because people sit the exam in a variety of different jurisdictions within the UK and abroad. And then in communication, we've divided it up into 4 particular areas that we want to make sure that we test. And this personalisation and respect is particularly new, as I've just said. And in terms of the sort of detail and blueprint and the running order, so when we say running order, we mean the 16 stations that you get on a particular day in the exam, because you probably know we set different stations on different days in the exam. So this is saying for this first subdivision, present a complaint of psychiatric history, so that will be in 100% of running order. So every day there will be a station that tests that. Physical health history, there's at least 50% of the running order. So at least 50% of days we have the exam, there'll be a physical health history station. And then you can see the percentages for the others there. Similarly for the examination ones, there will always be a psychotic and a non-psychotic one. There's a 50% chance of a physical examination, and actually that's linked to the physical history there. So there'll be at least one or the other, or possibly both of those two. And similarly, between the cognitive and the capacity and insight, there'll definitely be one or the other of those, and possibly both. And risk assessment is actually linked to safety planning, which is the next slide. So again, here we'll always have a biological management one. We'll always have one that looks at formulation, and you can see the other things there as well. We test communication in all stations, but we're certainly going to try to have these, making sure that we can absolutely identify at least one station that particularly addresses all these skill subdivisions as well. So hopefully this is really helpful to candidates, that we're being more explicit about how the exam is structured, and how that will help with people preparing for the exam as well. So I've already made this point. Yeah, we're going to have at least one about risk, at least one about cognitive or capacity, and at least one about physical health, either history or examination. We've also changed this slightly, so we're saying that we will always have stations covering these specialty areas listed there. So we used to say one developmental psychiatry station, but now we say one intellectual disability and one child and adolescent on each day. We didn't explicitly say forensic before, which we do now, and we didn't explicitly say substance use before, but we do now. So there'll be one of those, and there'll be at least 2 general adult, and the other 8 will be a mixture of stuff. This we haven't particularly changed, although we've changed the So the clinical scenarios can be in any setting: inpatient, outpatient, schools, prisons, community centres, people's homes, anything. Can be any age, and the patients can be any sort of developmental ability as well. And we can ask about any psychiatric disorder that's listed in the ICD. You'll see in the new syllabus we use the headings from ICD 11 because that's just being introduced into clinical services now. Just very briefly about the sort of option appraisal. I won't go into all the details of this, although yes, it took us a long time, a lot of work. Yeah, so and why we made the choice that we did to return to face-to-face. I mean, these are the sort of factors we were considering. Obviously, you have to consider sustainability. It's really important these days. What about international candidates and encouraging that? making the exams as cost effective as possible as well, but making sure that people can't cheat as well, how easy it is to operate, making sure that people with particular disabilities, for example, can have a fair exam, making sure that we aren't adversely affecting things in terms of differential attainment, making sure the exam is reliable so that people taking it on different days would get similar results, making sure it's valid, that it really tests what it's supposed to test, and taking into account all those stakeholder opinions. I'm very happy to answer more about all those things in the questions if people want to. But what came out of our consultation was that definitely people were saying reliability and validity are the most important factors. And the trainees, the examiners and educators all supported a return to a face-to-face exam because they felt it was a much better test of clinical skills in psychiatry, to put it in a nutshell. And there was particular concern about examination, mental state examination, physical examination, and communication skills in the online version, and making sure that we would optimally assess those if we didn't have to, that we'd optimally assess those. We did find there was a lack of awareness exam, which is partly why we're doing this webinar, and we're trying to put better information out about the exam. There's a couple of things we are developing, which I don't think, first to say, will be in the exam in September. But we are developing stations that incorporate an element of video consultation. We think that we'll try and include in the face-to-face exam, and we are looking again at active examiners. So this means the examiner asking you a question towards the end of the station. But our development is such that these won't be appearing in September. It's also clear that people didn't. We could improve our feedback that we gave to candidates. So we have already started reporting actual station scores to candidates, which hopefully they'll find helpful. And we are piloting free text feedback now that we have computer-based marking for the exam. So that's another development that's in the pipeline. So this is, I don't know if people recognize this, this is the English Institute of Sport. So we are planning to have the CASC in Sheffield at this location in September. People often ask why in Sheffield, and really it's economics that lends us to that, with, and accessibility, because it's reasonably accessible. And it's much cheaper to hire somewhere like this than, for example, say the Excel Centre in London, or even big venues in Birmingham or Manchester or other places. So just to give that explanation. And finally, of course, many things are happening in Liverpool this year. But one thing is the International Congress of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. So if you're there, we'll certainly myself, Susannah, and I think Vivek will be there. I'm very happy to answer more questions about the exam. We'll have a session specifically for trainees in the trainee lounge as well. So I think that is all I wanted to say. Please do put in your questions. I see we've got some already. And I'm just going to ask Steph, who is our PTC rep on our examination subcommittee, just to give a little response or reflections, because I was very anxious that it wasn't just me, and we got some perspective from her as well. So thank you, Steph.
Thank you for that, Ian. And that's a really helpful summary for what trainees can expect. So thanks for that. Yes, so I've just got a few points in response. Firstly, I think from the trainee perspective, my main point would be that the return to face-to-face CASC is a positive for us. I realise that travelling to Sheffield has significant cost implications, but from both the college's feedback from trainees and also the feedback that we obtained via the Psychiatric Trainees Committee, it was clear that this is what trainees wanted. And although I completely agree that face-to-face assessment is more valid and that's really important, I think perhaps even more importantly for trainees is that the return to face-to-face removes the internet and tech issues and allows trainees to be assessed on their performance on the day. So candidates who deserve to pass do. So I think that's fairer and hopefully less stressful for candidates as well. So my second point is that trainees have expressed dissatisfaction with the feedback from CASC for a long time. So I'm really pleased to hear that there's plans for both the free text feedback and individual marks to be released to trainees. And I hope that that will be helpful in understanding what areas and skills for trainees to focus on for future attempts. And just my final point was I'd like to reiterate that I know that you did mention this, Ian, but that reducing differential attainment really remains a priority for trainees. And I have to say that I've been pleasantly surprised at how focused and proactive the exams team is with regards to this. But despite that, it's proving a tough nut to crack. So there's clearly more work to be done there. So those were my main points. So now I'm going to hand over to Vivek, who is the CASC panel chair, for his top tips on how to pass CASC. Thanks, Vivek.
Hello. My name is Vivek Agarwal. I am the chair of the CASC panel. I'm also a general adult consultant psychiatrist working in Suffolk. Yeah, it sounds a bit grandiose. I mean, top tips for success. I mean, it's quite possible that you know most of what I'm going to talk anyway, but I thought maybe it helps to just prioritize some of the areas that you might want to work on in order to achieve increase your chances of success with the CASC. So, Ian, are you changing the slide? Yeah, thank you very much. Right. So basics, I mean, this is something that I really don't need to say. You're all grown-up professionals and you know that you need to be there on time. I think some of what I'm going to talk about is also based on my own experience, because I also appeared for CASC exam the first time it was organized back in 2008, and also through being in this role, having seen some glitches that people experience, whether it is to do with forgetting their ID or the phone rings at the wrong time. One of the things we worked out was you should not have your alarm on, because even if, I mean, if you have your phone on silent, but the alarm goes off, apparently it makes a noise. So yeah, either switch off your phone or also turn alarms off. So with virtual exams, it's quite obvious that you need to make sure that IT is working, make sure it's all tested ahead of the exam. When we return to face-to-face exams, making sure that you plan your stay and travel way ahead of time so that you are not dealing with the stress of last-minute travel arrangements, so that you are relaxed at the time of the exam, which is quite important. Next. Right. So what happens is most of the preparation for CASC, I think it happens throughout the time that you are training. So obviously leading up to the exam, you might do more exam focused practice, but what you see, what you do day to day in your job is what's going to help you prepare yourself for CASC eventually. So most important to see a variety of cases. Obviously, you will go through various rotations. So you will have an experience of general adult old age and the other specialties. But sometimes because of the way our rotations work, you might not be able to do certain specialties. So making sure, for example, if you haven't done a forensic assessment, forensic placement, maybe you want to spend a bit of time to get some experience in risk assessment. Risk assessment is done in other specialties as well. But if you get an opportunity to attend the specialties that you have not done as part of your placement rotations, then please do, because that can be quite valuable experience. Ian's already told you what to expect in terms of the whole variety of different types of scenarios. But in general, you want to make sure that you'll all be able to take a good history, but it's that the trick here is prioritizing the information that you need for this exam. Same goes for mental state examination, cognitive examination. Given time, given half an hour or 45 minutes, you probably will be able to do a very comprehensive assessment. But in that 7 minutes, you are asked to prioritize a certain area, and the trick is to be able to focus on that particular area of mental state examination or cognitive examination. We can move on. Next slide. Yeah. So when it comes to mental state examination, I sort of remember the things that really helped me a lot was being able to ask fluently about psychopathology, because you know what psychopathology terms are, but to be able to formulate questions to bring out, to explore the psychopathology, to bring out the psychopathology, it's quite important. So asking the right questions about psychopathology, practice prioritizing certain areas. So basically, as I said, you can do a complete mental state examination if you are given enough time. But what about if you have to focus on delusions or hallucinations, and how you still perform a full mental state examination by screening, quick screening of the other areas. So practicing the prioritization of certain areas as well as screening of the areas that are not necessarily the focus of the task is quite important. Some things that may be useful, and this is for if you are early on in your career, you might want to look at courses on present state examination or SCAN, because these are quite helpful in helping you to formulate those questions. How these courses go in detail in terms of the psychopathology to really understand what is behind those terms and how you can explore psychopathology. Next. Same with management. Again, with management, there are certain things that will hold you in good stead. Knowledge of current guidance. Now, if you are working in a child psychiatry job, you'll probably be more aware of whatever the current guidance is, or if you are doing substance misuse, you might know. But as things change, if you're not working that specialty, you might still want to keep up to date with whatever the most recent guidance is. NICE guidance, Maudsley, they are the most important ones. But otherwise also there are, as you know, with certain areas, for example, with substance misuse, there is a separate Orange Handbook. So things like that, if you ask SPRs or consultants who work in those specialty areas, they'll be able to give you some guidance on what is the appropriate way in which patients are managed. Personalization was mentioned in Ian's talk as well, and it's going to be quite important. And I think with stations, if you are explaining some kind of management, having knowledge of general management is important, but also being able to personalize to the scenario, to the role player situation is quite important. And I think that will be quite noticeable. And that's the kind of thing that examiners will be looking at for excellent scores. And always listen very carefully to the question. So what I did was, in preparation for this talk, actually, I asked some of my trainees to give me some tips. And a lot of the STs told me that it is a common pitfall not giving enough time to the role player to ask questions. So give the role player an opportunity to ask questions, especially when it is a management or explanation station. Listen carefully to the questions, because they are the prompts that you will then be able to give a response to. Okay. So some of my trainees also suggested that, and they did in preparation, keep some notes. So having a set of notes on range of common presentations. So this could be, psychotic and non-psychotic mental states, a manic patient, patient with depression, patient presenting with first episode psychosis. So having some notes in terms of what are the things in history you'd like to know, for example, how you'd be assessing mental state, or if it's a management station, what are the most important points that you do not want to miss when it comes to explaining the management of those scenarios. Framing questions, again, what happens is, especially I think it applies to people for whom English is not the first language. For example, I had a way of asking questions, but sometimes what would happen is I would hear a colleague or a consultant ask a question in a different way, and I thought it was much more effective, much more efficient. And so I started kind of changing the way that I would frame my questions as well. So always keep an eye on how other people speak as well. And if you find some good ways in which people explain things or people ask questions, then make a note of it, because those are the things that will make your CASC exam much more efficient as well. Okay. Right. So there's again, as I said, all the trainees that sent me tips, they all said practice. So, and I have to tell you the same thing. So practice is the most important thing. So as I said, your preparation starts from the first day that you start your training. So you're seeing lots of cases, but also, so there's two types of, you're practicing in terms of your general increasing your knowledge, increasing your clinical skills. But then when it comes closer to the time of CASC, or once you have registered for CASC, make a group of colleagues who are also doing CASC. Try and meet at least once or twice a week regularly, go through a few cases, and over time, you'll be able to discuss a range of cases. Some of the things that are quite important in terms of the practice is called CASC conditions. So CASC conditions basically meaning that you have to focus on a particular task within a certain amount of time. So being able to complete the task, focus on the task, and also to do it in time. And if you do the timed practice again and again, you will realize that you have a much better sense of time as well. You will start realizing that you have a sense that maybe you are somewhere getting close to the end of the station. And even before you hear the warning bell, you'll have an idea that you need to start winding up. Getting feedback from consultants in general, but also through locally organized CASC practice. So the local CASC practice, you may have some training going on with the deanery, but also within the trust that you work, within the training program that you work, if there is already some sort of arrangement to have CASC practice, it's good. If you don't have something like that, then speak to your TPD, speak to your tutors, ask them to organize local CASC practice. Even if you're not going to do CASC, if you are a co-trainee in your first year, you might want to volunteer to either just observe or volunteer to be a role player. So you start getting an idea of what the exam is like very early on, and not wait until you have actually signed up for the CASC. The most important thing, as I said, one of the most important things where people have a difficulty is time management. And the only way you can do some of these tasks in 7 minutes is by making sure that you are focusing on the task. Because when we design the scenarios, we expect that there is a certain amount of work that needs to be done within that station, and that is achievable within 7 minutes. And most people manage to do it as well. So be mindful of that. Next. Okay. So what happens on exam day? When you are outside the station, you get a set of instructions. For the management stations, you get 4 minutes. For the history and examination stations, it's 90 seconds. Management stations, you have to read the instructions carefully, because there's quite a lot of information. Sometimes it's almost the whole page. So make some notes. Make sure that you note down the important information that is given in the station, because that's something you're going to have to discuss inside the station. You may feel like it's an artificial situation, and it is, although it is artificial, we have got role players. It's best to imagine that you are in your clinic. So if you feel like you're in a clinic, how would you be dealing with the patient? So that will bring about something in terms of your manner, that will bring about some empathy in your manner, which will be noticeable to the examiner. So the conversation will flow more easily. It will not feel like you are acting. Stay focused on the task. And if you make notes outside, also making notes of the information, but also what the actual instructions are, what are you supposed to do, what are you being asked to do, so that you make sure that when you're in the station, you complete all the elements of the task. Sometimes it seems what happens is, especially in management stations, role player asks a question, and try and see if you are generally responding to these questions to the point. Because what if you give very long detailed explanation? So you have to have a balance. You have to give all the information, but not go into extraneous detail, because that will make you lose time. I'm repeating that point again. Give the role player opportunity to ask questions, because you'll get a lot of hints, prompts in terms of what you're supposed to do. Communication has to be clear, polite, without jargon. Some of the other things that I have found useful in my own experience, as well as some of the trainees have spoken to me. So if you get a chance to start a short case or a long case early enough, you may be attending Balint groups, but especially with the psychological therapies, if you get a chance to start a case, that's quite good. But otherwise, also what happens is all the training programs, they organize some basic training. You might have a CBT or a CAT training day. You might have DBT skills training. Whenever you get a chance to go on any such training, it will be a useful thing to do, because you will get more familiar with the terminology that is used in psychology. Same goes for Mental Health Act and Mental Capacity Act. The terminology that is used, you kind of form a much more effective language around being able to talk around therapies, because you can expect some stations will involve some sort of therapeutic input. The other things to do are attending governance meetings and any local meetings that you have, MDT meetings, for example, because you get to know about other services. So when you are talking about management, you're not only going to talk about medical management, you might talk about psychosocial support and what sort of other voluntary organizations are there, what are the other agencies available to help with certain types of situations. So familiarizing yourself with those types of services will be quite useful, because those will be something that you can expect a role player might ask you in terms of management. One of the other things about demonstrating demonstrating something within the station is you might be able to ask a question, and it is quite obvious. Sometimes the role player, without asking question, might highlight some information. If that happens, just so that you make sure the examiner doesn't miss, you might want to repeat it. You might want to highlight it and say, okay, I understand that you have given this information to me. I think I can see I've run out of time, and I hope I've been able to rush through some of the things that I think I hope you'll find useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vivek. It's really helpful from my perspective anyway. I'm sure from the participants as well. So I think we're going to move on to questions. I've got about 20 minutes, well, just under 20 minutes now for questions. So, and Chris is going to, I think.
Yes, that's great. Thank you very much. Those are three very useful, kind of insightful talks there. We've got quite a lot of questions. We've been trying to kind of cluster them together in terms of approaching them. So we'll just kick off and see how we get on here. So just the first thing, is there any plans for there to be any international diets of the CASC going to be happening? Quite a lot of people have been suggesting geographical locations to be covered, Egypt and Asian countries, Gulf countries, Pakistan. A few requests about where their sort of local one's going to be, as it were.
I think Susannah is the good person to answer this one.
Thank you. Yes, there is, and there's literally a paper going to the senior management team on this tomorrow, so I can't really kind of divulge any details, but that is something that is absolutely in the pipeline, and we're looking at kind of where our candidates are in terms of kind of where we will locate that. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you. So my camera's not working. So I'm just a blank screen. But there've been a few questions about, do you have any examples of what stations would be done for physical health examinations, both for the upcoming remote examination and the face-to-face?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so that we'd say for the remote examination that, yeah, we won't ask you to do anything that you can't do in a remote consultation. But for the face-to-face examination, you can be asked to do any physical examination that's relevant to the case. Yeah, so anything that's relevant to the management of psychiatric disorder. So that really covers most things if you think it through. I don't know, Vivek, if you want to say anything more than that.
No, I think it can, anything can be relevant depending on the case, but some of the things that will really be useful is a thorough neurological examination, because that's more related to some of the things we ask. Side effects of medication also as well. So making sure that you are able to perform a very thorough examination of side effects, extrapyramidal side effects, and TD. So
the next question is to do with the personalization respect, and just several people asking about how that would sort of look in practice, really, whether we would see like an example station of that, and what sort of things would be taken into consideration to do with things like people's gender identity and that kind of stuff, just how it would sort of play out in practice.
Yeah, this is a really good question. So we already have stations that address this to a certain extent. So for example, we'd include people from particular cultural backgrounds would be an example of that, and we'd expect the management to be tailored to that, as Vivek was saying. Yeah, I mean the whole issue about gender identity, gender fluidity, non-binary gender identity is obviously something that's increasingly we see in practice, isn't it? And really in the context of people having mental health problems, not necessarily in association. Everyone in a station will have a mental health problem, but they also may have these other aspects of their life, and we'd expect the management or the assessment to be sort of to be acknowledging that. I think that's perhaps the best way to put it.
In terms of people who need sort of adjustments to the exam because of their own disabilities or difficulties, how does that happen, and what's the process for it?
So I'll let Susannah answer about the process, but just the principle is that, yeah, no, we would endeavour to make reasonable adjustments for people with particular disabilities, and but we need evidence that people have that, and evidence of what adjustment is required. So by far the most common adjustment that we make is giving people extra reading time because they have dyslexia. So that's by far the commonest thing that we do. But do you want to say something about the process, Susannah?
Yeah, I mean, really, our sort of focus is making sure that that we're able to kind of make the adjustments that you need, and we do that in the kind of most personalized way that we can. So you just need to get in touch with us sort of at the point of application. The earlier you do it, the better, really, especially for some adjustments, because they can take a bit of logistical arrangement. But yeah, personalized, just get in touch with the team.
Will there be any new stations, or is it mainly the old stations that are being used? And someone's asked, as a follow-up to the physical exam question, is fundoscopy still on the list?
I would say fundoscopy is still on the list. Yeah, you can easily see how that might be relevant to psychiatric disorder. I'll let Vivek answer the question about new stations.
Yeah, so new station development, obviously during the pandemic, when we were organizing virtual exams, we had to organize a lot more days of exams just because we didn't have the same capacity per day to accommodate trainees. So as a result, trainees might have not seen many new stations, but we are constantly producing new stations, and you can definitely expect many more new stations. And as you heard Ian say about the syllabus, so we are going to also look at aligning the stations to the syllabus. So that's going to, there are certain gap areas if we look at the syllabus as it is now and our question bank. So there will be new stations, yes, and fundoscopy is on the list.
Thank you. And I know you guys have been looking at whether to reintroduce feedback. So if anyone's able to comment on that, please.
This feedback to candidates?
Yeah.
Yeah, so did they ask anything more specific? Because I did talk a little bit about feedback. So at the moment we give sort of collated feedback based on the sort of tick boxes that examiners endorse about where people haven't performed or where people could improve their performance in the station, and we give like a narrative based on what boxes were ticked, which hopefully which we try to be developmental and to improve things. So I think, but when people get it, I don't think they realize that actually it is personalized to the feedback that they got. But yeah, we've been asked definitely to give stations scores, and we actually did this in the January diet. So we fed back individual station scores. Once the mapping to the new syllabus is done on the question bank, which hopefully will be for September, we'll be able to link the station to those skills subdivisions and say, this was a station looking at this skill subdivision, and this is what you scored on it, and this is what the average score was for this station. So hopefully candidates will find that more helpful if unfortunately they don't pass the exam in terms of directing future learning.
This has been partially covered, I think, between yous, but a couple of people are asking about differential attainment and what's done to kind of combat that, and also sort of a follow-on from that, if there's any sort of resources or specific things that people could be recommended who are international medical graduates who would be wanting to sit CASC. Yeah, so
I can start by that, and I think Vivek probably want to say something as well. Yes, we've been working on differential attainment for a long time, and there's a big differential attainment gap in all postgraduate medical exams and indeed undergraduate medical exams. But it is definitely our aim to make our exam as fair as possible, and just to be testing those clinical skills in psychiatry and not really anything else. So we don't want it to be a language test. We just want people to have the right language ability to demonstrate clinical skills in psychiatry, for example. So in terms of that, we have made a few changes to the CASC over the years. So one is to increase the reading time that people get. A second is introducing more variety in terms of the patient. So this whole thing about personalization, we've already been working on this to an extent. The other is we ask the role players not to use really sort of heavy regional accents or sort of local words, which sometimes called vernacular. But yeah, we don't. So we ask them not to use local words or stuff like that. And obviously we train all our examiners in unconscious bias, and we do that actually quite regularly with them, because we're really aiming to make the exam completely as fair as possible. Obviously, differential attainment has many causes, and it's definitely not just, we know that it's not just about the test, it's about the training that people receive, but also actually their wider circumstances in life. So that's probably enough for me to say. I don't know, Vivek, you wanted to add to that?
No, the only thing I wanted to add was really there is a lot of effort that goes into making this exam fair. And one of the things that the trainers are, the examiners are trained for, and also on the day of the exam we do, is a process called standardization. So every examiner examining the same station, so any candidate that they get, they have the criteria is decided, and examiners are trained again and again to make sure that they stick to the criteria. So it is really based on the understanding of the examiners about what should constitute as a pass, and it's just to design it as as fair a system as possible. But as Ian said, yes, there are factors that are beyond the exam to really pick on. One of the things that has also been done is there was some funding for extra communication skills for overseas candidates. I don't know if it is a recurring funding, but there were some additional CASC training being organized through some deaneries. But that we'll have to find out if that's still going on.
Just one other thing I want to add is that we think like requests for reasonable adjustments are at a lower rate amongst international medical graduates. So so that's another thing to bear in mind. If you are an international medical graduate, you know, what support is there from the deanery if you think you might have dyslexia or something like that. So and yeah, if you're training in the UK, I think the deaneries or whatever it's called locally should be able to assist with that, but you need to do that a long time in advance because it's a bit of a process getting assessments and reports done.
Thank you very much. People have asked, are you anticipating that there'll be an oversubscription to the September CASC, and who will be prioritised, and also how far in advance will they find out the date of their examination?
I think this is Susannah's question.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we're not anticipating an oversubscription because doing the exam face-to-face, particularly with the space that we've got in Sheffield, means we've got we're sort of building to have an awful lot of capacity. It would be more than we've done at an online CASC. In terms of when you'll know if you've got a place and also when your exam day is, it will be I would say towards the end of June. We want to try and do it kind of sort of as soon as possible after the closing date, which is in June. And then in terms of prioritization, that's something that we are still taking advice on from our legal advisors. Thank you.
But yeah, we're definitely hoping to have as many places as possible, and obviously we're aiming to have places for everybody who wants one.
Great. There's quite a lot of logistical questions, just things like do I bring a stethoscope, do I bring a pen and paper, in between the stations where we have 7 minutes, how much reading time do we get? Is there a place to kind of go for all that information, all the kind of logistical stuff for the day? Is there like a blueprint of those Q&As for the CASC?
I'm not sure if there is right now, but we can absolutely make that. And also I think we'll probably, try and put all the questions that, we've answered in the chat or, through this webinar to kind of put them into one place so that everybody can access them. But it's really useful to have those, so it means we can provide that information in advance.
Perfect. But yeah, we do provide the physical examination equipment, and in the face-to-face CASC, you do one station straight after another. So you finish one station, then you start reading for the next station, and then you do the next station. So you do 8 stations in a row. This is partly how we can see twice as many candidates for each examiner for the face-to-face, and will give us a lot more capacity. We had a huge reduction in capacity for the online because we had to have gaps between the station.
Thank you. And will it continue to be 2 CASCs per year?
Yeah, there'll be 2 UK CASCs per year is what we're planning, but we're also planning for international centres. Which won't be this year, but may well be next year. But as Susannah says, we're just sort of putting together the plans for that.
Perfect. Yeah, a couple of people have asked just about the previous system, which continues, just to confirm it continues in terms of having to both pass overall in terms of your percentage and passing a minimum amount of stations. And somebody's asked specifically about if you find yourself in the position where you failed the exam repeatedly because you've got the overall pass mark but failed more than the minimum amount or the maximum amount of stations you can fail, what they should do about that, or any advice?
Yes, we're not proposing to change that. So you have to pass the pass mark for the exam overall, and you have to pass 12 stations. The reason that we say 12 stations to pass is to make sure there's you can demonstrate you've reasonably broadly covered the syllabus. Okay, because so we don't allow that much compensation, because it's conceivable you could pass with just 8 stations if you did really, really well on those. And maybe and not so well on the others, but then you wouldn't have demonstrated that you covered the syllabus properly. So this is why we're really promoting the syllabus and the blueprint, because that makes it really clear, hopefully, that we will test across all the psychiatric specialties, across all the different skills, a range of different settings. So as Vivek was saying, I don't know if Steph wants to come in after this, but in terms of tips for sort of arranging practice, but you do, because you won't have done jobs in all these settings, so you do need to get experience in all these settings in order to be fairly confident of passing the exam. Steph, I don't know if you've got any suggestions about getting that sort of syllabus coverage and experience from your point of view.
Well, yeah, I suppose, like you say, I think getting on a WhatsApp group or whatever social media platform to be able to organise regular practice sessions with your colleagues, I think, is probably the key to passing. I mean, I know obviously things have slightly changed in the last couple of, with the new syllabus and everything, but there was always quite a range of topics that would come up, although we might not be explicitly told at that time. But I think I actually saw in the chat that Gemma had put a link to a book which certainly we used before our exam, which I think it's got mods in the title. Somebody's mentioned it, sorry. Anyway, I think maybe you could repost it in the link again, Gemma, so everyone could see it. But that actually was quite good for like giving just, it covered basically all the specialities. And, by the time you'd covered like a couple of topics on each one, you were kind of getting the bones of what you need to be asking. Obviously, it's not the same as having lots of real life experience, but I guess if you know those areas you're lacking in, then those are definitely areas to be focusing your revision on. And I think I would just say with Vivek's, that was really helpful, everything you said there. I think you sort of, it's also, I remember we spent quite a lot of time getting like slick, very short nods to different things, in like questions, where the focus was something else. Just like in every question, we made sure we referenced risk with like a one-liner, so to give the the actor opportunity if there was something to throw in. Usually they'll bite if you give them an opportunity, or similarly to always, like always a one-liner screening for substance abuse, just these sort of, so they were very quick and slick, and you weren't spending very long on them, but you were making sure that you were kind of always covering certainly risk in every station, really, no matter what the question was. But yeah, just the kind of, once you could really see you were getting much quicker at those things, and they were taking very little time by the time you'd been practicing many times.
So I mean, classic areas that people don't get experience of some of the neurodevelopmental, if they've done a LD job, they haven't got CAMS experience necessarily, they might not have done forensic, and a lot of people haven't done substance use, but the college view is that substance use is a really important part of psychiatry. So we're definitely going to continue to test it, and we've made that more explicit in the blueprint, that we'll always have a station on substance with a significant element of substance use in it. So don't just practice with the topics that you're familiar with. Definitely try and cover the whole blueprint.
I just noticed we've come to 7 o'clock, and so just a couple of things. First of all, the Susannah's just put the link in there for, we actually have an agreement with Cambridge University Press that if you register with the library in the college, that you get the ebook of that Maudsley book for free, and you can access that online, and they have hard copies as well. I wonder whether between us. There's about 75 questions altogether, so thank you very much for everybody for asking the questions, and perhaps, as Susannah said, we might be able to boil those down to some of the key themes and do a bit of a Q&A that we can put somewhere in terms of people be able to access that information. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Vivek and Stephanie and Susannah for being here today and running this event with us. It certainly has been really useful for me. I feel like I've come away with lots of new pieces of information and bits and pieces to look at to support people. But yeah, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. And yeah, so the recording of this should be on the website soon, and we'll be in touch beyond that about things like the Q&A and stuff like that. But feel free to email ptcsupport@rcpsych.ac.uk with any specific queries, and we can discuss it with the exams team. But yes, thank you very much, everybody.